Friends, we find ourselves in this series of Behind the Magic, and I really think it's just an excuse for Jonathan and I to go to Disney World again. But not that we need an excuse, but one of the series behind it is that we're diving deeper into behind the story. What is the basics of our faith that we're pulling out from this? And I truly believe that at times we find ourselves on the wildest ride in the wilderness. It's taken from a phrase used to describe Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. It is truly one of my have-to rides at Magic Kingdom. I think because as a child, it has the lowest height restriction. And so it's one of the first big rides you get to ride as a little kid. And so it has kind of always been that nostalgia for me. But it claims that it is the wildest ride in the wilderness because the vision behind it is it's this runaway mine train. There is no engineer. There are no visible brakes. You are in this rickety looking cart and this feeling that there is no control. You are just completely out of control in this thing. But can I tell you what's really happening? There has never, not one time, not for a single second, actually ever run away. Because behind the magic, and that says our series, it's the sensation of it. It feels like chaos. And that is precisely one of the most engineered attractions that is ever built. It is a fixed track, a braking system that can stop any cart anywhere on the course. So the ride feels like chaos, but the engineering is complete and total oversight every step of the way. But friends, I want to make you a promise this morning. And if you'll just hold on to it for a little while, I want to try to show you why that is true. Because the wilderness that you're in, the wilderness of life, where you find yourself, that may feel like a runaway train that has never been out of control for one single second. Friends, we've all been on a detour that we didn't choose. There's been something in our life that has thrown us off path. And some of you know what I mean by that, and it is so literal for your life. If you've tried, and I have tried to get from my house off of Cypress Lake to Metter, I typically go the shortest route. Well, if you know anything about what's going on right there, there's a bridge down. They've shut that road down, and I will still, even though it's been a year, blindly turn right and go that direction and then have to reroute around. Life gives us detours. Of course, when we're in our GPS, we don't ever take the one that says 5 minutes longer, do we? We choose the path that is the shortest. We look around roads and there's times we don't recognize where we're going. These detours make us question, am I going the right way? Did I miss a turn? And most of us live that question, not on roads, but in our lives. Did I miss something? Am I supposed to be on a different path? Am I following where God is leading? Maybe you're living that right now. You had a plan. You knew the route, the career, the relationship, the family, the future you were building. And somewhere something shifted. A phone call came, a door closed, a season showed up that is definitely not on your calendar. And here you are, on roads you didn't expect, wondering where you got off course. Friends, I believe if we take some time this morning and we look at one of the oldest passages in Scripture, we will also see 600,000 people on the wildest detour in history. And I believe it'll help change the way we see the road that we're on right now. You see, my first point is that God chose the long way on purpose. The beginning of the passage we read, Exodus chapter 13, verses 17 and 18, it tells us about the detour. If you're newer to Scripture, Exodus is the second book of the Bible. It's got this person of Moses who was interacting with a burning bush that was God telling him to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And Pharaoh always said, no. And so there was plagues. And on the last one, when the moment was right, let my people go actually worked. And 600,000 people are walking out of Egypt on foot. They've been slaves for over 400 years. Most of them have never known anything except servitude. They don't know how to fight. They don't know how to build their own lives. A lot of them don't even know what freedom is supposed to feel like. And they need to get from where they are to where God has promised them. So what does that look like? If we draw our attention back to verse 17, it says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. God saw that shorter road. We click, yes, that's the road I want to take. It was right there. God chose something different. But here's what we need to know about that shorter road. It was also a military corridor. Every few miles, Egyptian soldiers, armed checkpoints. It wasn't just a road. It was a war zone dressed as a shortcut. And so God looked at it and said, not that way. And here's the part that gets me. The text actually lets us hear what God was thinking. There's not much of scripture that gives us the inside to God said, but listen to this. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. Think about this just for a minute, because I think there is more to that sentence than we usually notice. God wasn't worried that they were going to lose a fight. But God was worried about what fear does to our memory. Have you ever noticed how fear lies to us about the past? Think about it. These people have been slaves. They've been beaten, overworked, watched their babies being taken from them. Egypt was a nightmare, and by any honest measure, but God knew something about fear that we know too. And if we're honest, fear edits our past. It'll soften the hard edges. It'll crop out the chains and leave out the certainty. It forgets the suffering, but holds on to that familiar. We know this, right? It's why people go back to relationships that have hurt them, because at least they know what to expect from that pain. And the unknown feels scarier than the familiar, even if the familiar can be damaging. Friends, I've sat with people, good people, people of faith, who went back to something that wasn't healthy for them. And when I asked about it, it's the same version of, at least I knew what I was dealing with. So fear edits the past, but also fear makes bondage feel like home. As weird as that is to say. That's what God was protecting them from. God chose a different road. Verse 18 says, God led the people by the desert road toward the Red Sea. What God is saying is God looked exactly who these people are, not the ideal version, not who they'll be in 10 years if everything went perfectly. He looked at who they were right there with all the fear, all the trauma, all 400 years of someone else telling them they didn't matter. And God looked at all of that and God said, I know the road that fits where you actually are. Friends, that's God's grace. That's grace, God knowing and gifting us before we even know what we need. It's not the kind of grace that pretends we're stronger than we are, that hands you the road that you genuinely cannot walk down. What if the hard road isn't evidence that God forgot you, which is a lot of what we'll think? But what if it's evidence that God was paying very close attention? So friends, God chose the long way on purpose. But if you also read that middle paragraph that kind of just seems a little out there, the second point is they didn't travel light, and they shouldn't have. In verse 19 of this passage, it's real easy to read right past it. But in one sentence, I think it might be one of the most quietly beautiful things in this entire passage. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. Friends, I want to tell you about Joseph just for a second. By this point in time, Joseph had been dead for roughly 400 years. Nobody in the crowd had met him, had seen his voice, heard his voice, or seen his face. He was their ancestor so far back that he was just this legend. There would be an Irk Russell t-shirt for Joseph. If I'm making that connection, you got it? Okay. But before he died, Joseph made a family promise, something. He said, when God comes through for you, and he will come through, don't leave me in Egypt. Carry my bones home. Joseph believed in a rescue that he was never going to see. He planned his funeral around a promise that wouldn't be kept for 4 centuries. And now at this moment, 600,000 people are walking out of Egypt, grabbing everything they can carry, shoving it into as much of their Ford Explorer. Oh, wait, that's my daughter's dorm stuff. But anyway, grabbing everything they can carry, and Moses stops in that moment. And he picks up the coffin. Just picture that. People streaming past, loading all that they can carry, and Moses kneeling down and taking this with us. Everybody else has gold, but Moses got the bones. And I honestly think if I had been there, I might have been asking, can anybody help with this? Anybody? Every single one of us, though, is carrying someone else's bones. And I mean that for this congregation. There are people whose names are in our church's history. People who have prayed this place into existence, who sat in seats before this was even here. People who pledged and gave and sacrificed for something they would never see complete or the beauty of what it looks like today. People who had faith for a future that they are not living in. We are walking today in the answer to prayers that those individuals prayed. Those are our bones that we are carrying. And here's the part that I can't let go. The book of Joshua, much later in the story, after the wilderness, after the conquest, tells us the bones of Joseph was finally buried in Shechem, in the plot of land that Jacob had bought. But here's what I think is most freeing for all of this. When we can think about it and Joseph's story, it means we don't have to see the ending to be faithful in the middle. Joseph did it. And you know what the New Testament holds up as Joseph's most faithful act? In Hebrews 11, it's a chapter in the New Testament that talks about the great faith. And it wasn't his dreams. It wasn't his time in prison. It wasn't saving Egypt from famine. The funeral arrangements are what's listed in Hebrews 11. In verse 22, it says, by faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. The faith act was the bones, because the bones were saying something without words. They're saying the story isn't over. So friends, point one, God chose the long way on purpose. Number two is they didn't travel light, and they shouldn't. And the third point that gives us all encouragement is the pillar never left. Verse 20, after leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. That word edge is very real for some of us. And we're standing at the edge, not on a map, but in your actual life. The moment when everything is familiar is behind you, and what is out front is nothing you recognize, no roadmap, no clarity, just the unknown stretched out ahead of you. And this is exactly where they are. And where they find themselves in verse 21, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so they could travel by day or night. The text doesn't tell us that God sent them a sign. It doesn't say that God gave them a map and pointed them in the right direction. Thank goodness, because there was kind of 40 years of this wandering. But the Lord went before them, is what it said. A cloud by day. They're in the desert. This provides shade. We know what the shade is in the heat of South Georgia. And by night, fire, light to travel with. I love this detail because the presence of God didn't just comfort them. It expanded what they could do. They could move at hours they never could have before. God's presence in our life doesn't just meet you where you are, but sometimes the presence of God gives you the capacity to do things you didn't know you could. I want to ask you something. Have you ever experienced that? Not literally the cloud or fire, but a season in life that was harder than anything you've ever faced. And somehow, some way, you got through that week that you thought was absolutely sure was going to break you. Friends, that's the pillar. It doesn't always look like cloud and fire. Sometimes it's like a peace that has no business existing in everything that feels like crushing down on you. Sometimes it's a strength that you didn't know you needed. It's a text from someone that couldn't have possibly known your depth, but it just gave you the opportunity to exhale. Sometimes it's enough grace for today. You see, the presence of God isn't something that we can earn. It's the starting point, not the prize. Now, I have to tell you what happens next. Because it would be great if the story just ended there, right? The pillar out front, everything falling into place, orderly marching into the promised land 3 days later. But we turned the page to chapter 14, and right around the corner, Pharaoh has changed his mind. Egypt is mobilized. 600 chariots come rushing down. Water is in front of them. The army is behind them, and there is nowhere to go. And then the pillar moved. Now, we've been sitting in this passage where the pillar of God is out front, where the Lord goes before them, where the promise is that presence leads the way. And that's the whole comfort of everything we've been looking at. And then the worst thing that could happen happens. The pillar moves, not forward, but behind them. The pillar of cloud, the presence of God, had been out for every single mile of the journey, and it repositions itself between Israel and the Egyptian army, a wall of fire toward Egypt, a cloud covering toward Israel. The guide became the rear guard. Friends, God did not disappear when it got dangerous. God just repositioned. And I think that tells us something important about how God actually works. God goes before you into the things you can't yet see. God comes behind you when threat is closing in. The pillar didn't leave, it shifted. So I want to ask you something real. Where is your wilderness right now? Not in a vague, general Sunday school way, but specifically, what is the road you didn't choose? What's the detour that's got you up at 3 a.m. wondering if you went wrong somewhere? Friends, the detour isn't punishment, it's a calibration with God. But here's what I want you to carry out of here today. The detour was chosen, not because God wanted you to suffer, but because God, who knows exactly where you are right now, said, I know a way through that fits exactly who you are. So the detour was chosen. The bones are worth carrying. The promises that you are standing on, the faith of the people who believe before you, the faithfulness of God, the story isn't over just because they can't see the ending. So don't mistake the middle for the finish line. The detour was chosen, the bones are worth carrying, and the pillar never left its place. You are not alone, and you never have been. So while Walt Disney can claim to have the wildest ride in the wilderness, I believe God is leaving us with something more than just a roller coaster this morning. God is leaving us with a pillar and a presence that has never changed. Because before the Red Sea opened, the Lord was before them. Before Sinai shook and the covenant of God was made, the Lord went before them. Before the promised land ever came into sight for this group that is traveling through, the Lord went before them. So maybe this week we take Exodus 13:22 and we write it down, put it on your phone, stick it somewhere where you'll see on Tuesday when it doesn't feel like a Sunday. Because neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. God shows up. God goes before you and after you and beside you, and that has never once stopped being true. Faith isn't knowing the whole route, because we never will. But faith is trusting in the one who's laid every inch of it out and who walks with us through this wild ride and through our wilderness. God is with you.